The Miller family had always gathered on Sundays. It was one of the few traditions Edward Miller insisted on, long after his three children had grown and scattered across the county. No matter how busy they were, Edward expected them to return to the old farmhouse where he and Margaret had raised them. On this particular Sunday, a heavy late summer rain pelted the windows, the sky a deep bruised gray. Margaret fussed over the roast in the kitchen while Edward sat in his armchair, staring at the fire as if trying to draw strength from its glow. His once broad shoulders were thinner now, his skin pale and drawn. A persistent cough rattled his chest every few minutes, but he waved Margaret off whenever she urged him to rest. "Don't let them see me weak," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Margaret's eyes softened. "They'll worry either way. They've got enough to fight over already," Edward said, and his hand tightened on the arm of the chair. The first to arrive was Daniel, the eldest. He swept in with his wife, Cara, and their two young children, bringing the smell of wet wool and expensive cologne. Daniel had inherited Edward's square jaw and commanding presence, though where Edward's was rough-hewn, Daniel's was polished, the kind of man who wore tailored suits even when visiting his parents. "Dad," Daniel said warmly, kneeling by the chair, "you look good. Strong." Edward snorted. "Don't flatter me, boy. I know what I look like." Daniel laughed, but didn't contradict him. Behind them, Cara ushered the kids toward the kitchen, clearly eager to avoid the tension that often hung in this house. Becca arrived next, slipping quietly through the front door with a bottle of wine tucked under her arm. At 35, she had a calm, grounded presence, with soft features and kind eyes. She worked as a social worker in town and had never married, though she often joked that her clients felt like her children. "Hey, Dad," she said, kissing his cheek. "You warm enough?" Edward nodded, his expression softening. "Good to see you, Becca." Finally, Michael appeared, 10 minutes late and already looking defensive as he shook rain from his hoodie. At 30, he was lean and restless, his hair perpetually unkempt. He lived in a string of rented rooms and worked odd jobs that never seemed to stick. His arrival drew a subtle shift in the room. Daniel's jaw tightened, Becca's posture straightened, and Edward's eyes flickered with something unspoken. "Sorry," Michael muttered. "Car wouldn't start." "Or maybe you just didn't start on time," Daniel said dryly. "Daniel," Becca warned under her breath. Dinner was served, and for a while the rhythm of tradition held. Margaret's cooking filled the air with warmth, and conversation flowed in fits and starts. But beneath the surface, fault lines were widening. Daniel spoke at length about the family construction business, which he had been running in practice for years. "With the new developments going up on the west side, we'll be busier than ever." "Dad, I was thinking—" "We'll talk business later," Edward interrupted sharply, coughing into his napkin. Michael, who had been silent until then, set down his fork. "Funny how you two always talk business without me. Not that I'd have anything to contribute, right?" Daniel gave him a tight smile. "You've made it pretty clear you're not interested in responsibility." "Or maybe I never got the chance," Michael shot back. "Boys," Margaret said gently, but Edward's raised hands silenced them. Becca exhaled slowly. It was always like this. Daniel and Michael circling each other, fighting old battles. She caught Edward's gaze and saw something there she couldn't quite read. Later, after everyone had gone to bed, Edward sat alone at the kitchen table. A manila envelope lay before him, his newly updated will. He traced the edge of the envelope with a trembling finger, his mind heavy with doubt. "This will keep them together," he whispered to himself, though a part of him feared it might do the opposite. The next morning, life returned to its separate rhythms. Daniel stood in the office of Miller & Sons Construction, surveying the site maps spread across his desk. He had been effectively running the company for 3 years, ever since Edward's health began to decline. In his mind, there was no question about the future. "This business is mine," he told Cara that evening over dinner. "Dad built it, and I've kept it alive. It's only right." Cara, ever pragmatic, raised an eyebrow. "You think your siblings see it that way?" Daniel's mouth tightened. They don't have to. Becca doesn't care about the business, and Michael, well, he's never shown he can handle anything long-term. Dad knows that Becca, meanwhile, sat at the kitchen table with Margaret, folding laundry while her mother sipped tea. "You always take on too much," Margaret said, patting Becca's hand. "Your brothers could help more, you know." "They help in their own ways," Becca replied, though her tone was weary. Margaret hesitated. "I just hope, whatever happens after your father is gone, you three stay close." Becca's chest tightened. "Why wouldn't we?" Margaret gave her a sad smile. "Because money changes people. Even good people." Across town, Michael sat in his cramped apartment, staring at a pile of unpaid bills. His phone buzzed with a message from an old friend offering him a dubious business opportunity, but he ignored it. "They think I'm useless," he muttered, pacing. "Daniel's the golden boy, Becca's the saint, and I'm the screw-up." When he thought of his father, a complicated mix of love and resentment bubbled up. Edward had always been tough on him, always comparing him to Daniel. No matter how hard Michael tried, it never seemed to be enough. "I'm not going to be left out," he said to the empty room. "Not this time." That night, Edward sat up in bed, coughing until Margaret rushed to bring him water. "You need to rest," she pleaded. "No," Edward rasped. "I need to make sure the kids are provided for. I'm doing what's best for them, even if they don't see it now." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Please, Edward, equal shares. It's the only way to keep them together." But Edward shook his head, stubborn as ever. Fair doesn't always mean equal. Edward's decline was swift. Within weeks, he was bedridden, his once booming voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. The siblings took turns visiting, each visit carrying its own weight. Daniel sat beside the bed, his hand on Edward's frail arm. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll keep the business running. I'll make you proud." Edward's cloudy eyes sharpened. "It's not about pride, Daniel. It's about responsibility. Don't let greed tear this family apart." Daniel nodded solemnly, though inside he felt only certainty. "It's mine. Always has been." Becca came next, holding her father's hand gently. "You've always been the glue," Edward told her, his breathing labored. "When I'm gone, your mother will need you. Your brothers will need you too, though they won't admit it." Tears slipped down Becca's cheeks. "I just want us to stay a family." Edward gave her a faint smile. "So do I." When Michael entered the room, Edward's eyes softened. "I know you think I don't believe in you," Edward said quietly. "But I do. I wanted more for you." Michael swallowed hard. "More than what?" "I've spent my whole life trying to measure up." Edward's hand trembled as he reached for his son. "Stand tall, Michael. Find your own way." Michael wanted to say 1,000 things, to ask for love, for forgiveness, but the words stuck in his throat. That night, Edward Miller passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a family teetering on the edge of fracture. The lawyer's office smelled of old paper and polished wood. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her face pale but composed. Daniel, Becca, and Michael sat in tense silence as the lawyer unfolded the document. "Edward Miller's last will and testament," he began. "To my beloved wife, Margaret, I leave all personal effects in a trust fund for her care." Margaret dabbed at her eyes, nodding. "To my eldest son, Daniel Miller, I leave controlling interest in Miller & Sons Construction." Daniel's chest swelled, though he tried to keep his expression neutral. "To my daughter, Rebecca Miller, I leave the family home and its surrounding land." Becca blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected that. "And to my youngest son, Michael Miller." The lawyer hesitated. "I leave a savings account containing $30,000. The room went still. "That's it?" Michael's voice cracked. 30 grand? That's what I'm worth to him?" "Michael," Margaret began, but he surged to his feet. No! Daniel gets the business, Becca gets the house, and I get scraps? He turned on Daniel. You did this. You convinced him. Daniel raised his hands. I didn't convince anyone. Dad knew who was capable of running things. Capable, Michael spat. Or just your perfect little clone. Becca stood, trying to mediate. Michael, please. Stay out of it, Becca. You got yours too. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. Margaret buried her face in her hands. This is exactly what I feared. In the days that followed, grief gave way to anger. Michael stopped answering calls. When Becca finally found him at a dingy bar, he looked haggard and furious. He always loved Daniel more, Michael said bitterly. Now he's proved it. That's not true, Becca insisted. Dad he thought this was best. Best for who? Michael snapped. Certainly not me. Meanwhile, Daniel buried himself in work, determined to prove he deserved his inheritance. But when Michael confronted him at the construction office, the facade cracked. You think you earned this? Michael growled. Daniel's voice was cold. I did earn it. You've done nothing but drift through life. Dad didn't owe you anything. Michael's fists clenched. You're a snake, Daniel. And I'm not done fighting. Becca's attempts to mediate only deepened her exhaustion. Margaret, watching her children unravel, finally confessed to Edward's reasoning. He thought leaving Michael less would push him to grow, she said, tears streaming down her face. He didn't mean to hurt him. Becca's heart broke. But that's exactly what he did. The final confrontation came late one night, back at the family home. Michael had discovered a way to sell his small share of the business to an outside investor, a move that would wrest control from Daniel. Daniel burst into the living room, red-faced. You'd sell us out to strangers? You left me no choice, Michael shouted back. Becca stood between them, shaking. Stop this, you're tearing everything apart. Daniel pointed a finger at Michael. Dad was right about you. You only think about yourself. Michael's voice broke. And he never thought about me at all. The room fell silent. Becca spoke, her voice low but steady. Dad wanted us to be strong, but he went about it the wrong way. If you two can't see that, we'll lose more than just money. We'll lose each other. Her words hung in the air. For a moment it seemed they might listen, but the damage was done. Michael left without another word, the front door closing like a final chapter. Months passed. Daniel worked tirelessly to keep the business afloat, but the joy of victory was gone. Every success felt hollow without his father's approval or his brother's trust. Becca stayed with Margaret, tending the house and caring for her mother's fragile heart. She wrote letters to Michael, most of which went unanswered. Michael, now living in a distant city, found steady work for the first time in years. But each paycheck felt like a reminder of what he'd lost. Not just wealth, but a family. One autumn evening, Becca sat alone on the porch watching the leaves fall. She thought of her father, her brothers, the laughter that once filled this house. They had all inherited something, she realized. Not just land or money, but Edward's stubbornness, his pride, and his love, flawed though it was. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Becca whispered into the cool air, maybe one day we'll find our way back to each other. And though the wind carried her words away, a small, fragile hope remained.